So a few weeks ago, I heard a story about a priest. Her name is Fleming Rutledge, and she is widely regarded as one of the better preachers in our church. And she really is a fantastic preacher, truly. If you ever get the chance to hear her preach or read one of her sermon compilations, do it! But anyway, she is well regarded enough as a preacher that there are organizations and diocese groups of clergy that will invite her out sometimes to give talks to preachers on, preaching, right? And the story I heard was from one of the other folks that were invited to speak at the same event as Reverend Fleming. And after Reverend Fleming gave her talk all about preaching the good news of God and Jesus Christ, about what Christ has done in our lives, about the grace that we have thus received, after her talk there was a Q&A section, right? And during this session of question and answers, one of the priests, the people who were there, one of the preachers, they got up and they said something like, "Well, that's all well and good, Reverend Fleming, but what about giving our congregations, the people hearing us preach, what about giving them something to do, right? Some instructions, some actionable items, right?" And Reverend Fleming apparently took a second and said, "Yeah, that sounds nice, but it's just not the gospel." Because it's not, right? The gospel is that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still sinners. Not after we got done with it, right? Not after we got our act together, not after we got right with God, right? While we were still sinners, while we were still broken, while we were still a people who could not get our act together, while there were no instructions or actionable items on the docket that could fix it for us, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's God proving his love for us, right? That's what Paul says. That's the love of God in action. That's what the Matthew passage that Reverend Sam just read is talking about when it says, verse 36 here, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. When he saw them, he loved them. He felt for them. He cared about them. Why? Because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, the text says. That's why Jesus loved them. That's why he had compassion on them, because they were people who didn't know what to do. They were hurting, they were broken, they were harassed. They're people who are helpless, unable to help themselves, unable to fix themselves. They're like sheep without a shepherd, and that hits a little too close to home sometimes. And then Jesus, of course, seeing a need, filling a need, seeing harassed and hurting, helpless, and a lost group of people, decides to do something about it. He turns to his disciples, right, verse 37, and sends them out into this, right, because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few, right? Now, our keen ears will pick up that sounds an awful lot like an instruction, right? An actionable item. Something to do, right? But keep listening, because verse 38, therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Oh man, we were so close to having something to do. We were so close to having something to hold up as our own achievement. Jesus says, before we go out into the fields and the harvest, two things need to be understood. One, we don't do it without prayer. Full stop. And what is prayer but handing it over to God, right? Understanding that it's all God's anyway. And two, we recognize that this is his harvest, not ours. Not ours to be good at, not ours to achieve in the middle of, none of that. Jesus' solution to the problem of people hurting and being sheep without a shepherd, his first solution is not activity, it is prayer. Because the problem and the solution, the field and the harvest, all of it belongs to God. The mission belongs to God. The church belongs to God. Salvation belongs to God. Even the laborers in the field belong to God. All of this is God's. And understanding that first thing before anything else happens is paramount. Because if we don't get that, we start to think that anything we get in this life, good or bad, anything we do for the cause of the kingdom, right, is because we've earned that. Because we've achieved it. Because we're good at it or bad at it or worse or better than anyone else. And that is just bunk. That's nothing. Jesus says, we pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to remind us that this is not about how strong or how weak we are. The mission of God does not live or die. It doesn't fail or succeed based off of our ability. It never has, right? Think about the first people that he sent out into the fields for the harvest, right? We've got folks who hardly ever understood what it was that he was talking about, right? We have folks who would deny him and betray him, who would fall and flee and fear, and still, he sends them out, right? Because the effectiveness of the mission, the salvation of the world, the comfort for the harassed and the helpless, the shepherd going out to find the sheep who don't have one, all of that, it does not depend on the greatness of the messengers, which is fantastic news for us. The kingdom is heaven, the kingdom of heaven is brought near, verse 7, not because God has found some impressive people to announce it, but because God is gracious enough to have compassion on the people, on the sorry folks who need it the most, us. The God who would come near to us, who would come be like us, to live the same life that we do, all of this depends on him. All of it. So then we come to verse 1 of the next chapter here, Jesus giving his disciples authority, right, over unclean spirits, to cast them out, to cure every disease and every sickness, aka God's business, right? This is what God does. And then again, verse 8, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out the demons, aka God's business. These are the signs, right? The miracles that point to what Jesus has come to do in the world, right? He's come to heal what sin has broken. He's come to cleanse that which has been deemed unclean, to liberate that which is in captivity or oppressed. He has come to raise the dead. He tells the disciples that to go and announce that the kingdom has come, it means that life is springing up where only death has ever been. That real change, real healing, real transformation is on the table because, again, verse 7, the kingdom of heaven has come near. That's the announcement. That's what all of this authority is pointing to, that the kingdom is near because the king is near. Wherever Christ is, forgiveness is there. Wherever Christ is, mercy is there. Sinners, regular people living regular lives, which is to say everyone who has ever been hurt or has hurt. Anyone who has ever broken or been broken. So everyone, wherever Christ is, those people, us, sinners, have hope. We have hope because the King has come near to us. And finally, the very last thing in this passage, the other half of verse 8, and this is right after Jesus authorizes his disciples to take their share in announcing the kingdom through healing and casting out and cleansing and raising up. Right after that, he says what this all sort of hinges on. Verse 8, he says, you have received without payment, give without payment. And in some ways, he is maybe gut-checking them a little bit to make sure they're not going around charging people for miracles, right? And that's a plot point in the book of Acts, and it does not go great. But there is more happening in this text. You received without payment, so give without payment. It's also translated faithfully as freely you received, so freely give. Everything that the disciples have, everything, every bit of their power and authority, every bit of their own healing and help, finding a shepherd who would lead them, every single thing that the disciples have, they have received, right? They have been given everything. They didn't earn it. They didn't deserve it, so they can't gatekeep and decide who is out and who is in, who deserves it and who doesn't. They don't have the power to keep the reality and the truth of God's work in the world hidden behind a veneer of exclusivity anymore that says, because I don't like the way that your brokenness looks, you can't have what I have. Freely you have received, so freely give, right? He's saying, look, I know where I found you. I know where you were. I know what you were going through. I know the people that you were. I know the sin and the shape of your specific brokenness, the way that the world has left you harassed and helpless. Verse 36, and here you are, yet here you are. So there is nothing. There is nothing that bars anyone else from receiving that same grace and healing from me either. Nothing. And the same is true for us and of us as well, right? Forgiveness is a gift. Grace is a gift. Salvation is a gift. Given and received, not earned, not achieved, not anything but put into our hands. The Christian life is not transactional, right? It is reception only. We all live, every one of us, by what we receive from the living God in Jesus Christ, which is grace. And because we receive it freely, we give it freely. We are free to give it freely. We aren't beholden to expect people to be good enough or act the right way or fit our ideas or expectations before we can love them. We can just love them. We can just love them because God's grace happened before we looked good enough, right? And it always will. Grace precedes in every way. It always comes before. Forgiveness, love, compassion, all of that happened before we merited it or earned it. And yet, we are loved as we are. And the living God in Jesus Christ frees us to love others as they are, even and especially when that doesn't feel possible. Folks, if we find ourselves this morning among the helpless and the harassed, the weary and the burdened and the burned out and broke down and the tired of pretending to have it all together, among the people who have tried and failed to save ourselves, then I have got good news that no one and nothing can take from you. God's grace is real. God's compassion is real. God's salvation is real. The forgiveness is real. And while yet we were still sinners, still trying to make it on our own, still trying to prove our own worth, still achieving our way into being good enough, while still we were sinners, our God saved us. That's our reality. That's where we stand. And that's who we are. And thanks be to God.